decades, Salesforce has helped nonprofits build the relationships that achieve great missions. Nonprofit Cloud is a complete set of nonprofit technology solutions built to connect your nonprofit with the people who care about your cause. Now you can get started faster with Nonprofit Cloud with a pre-packaged solution of core capabilities that sets you up with the foundation you need to drive growth and impact at lower cost. Learn more about how your organization can benefit from the newest way to get started with Nonprofit Cloud from Salesforce.
All right, we are
Hello.
live. Oh, sorry, Kate, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you go right ahead, Alex.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for dealing with our bumpy start, and thank you all for joining us for our presentation, Enhancing Digital Inclusion Projects via Community of Practice. Good morning or good afternoon from wherever it is you are in the world. I normally am based out of Kansas City, Missouri, but I am currently in Portland for the Public Library Association conference, which is why you see the hotel room behind me. So the time zones have thrown me off a little bit. We're going to start a little bit with the speaker bio and introduction before we get into really the meat of our presentation. I'll go first. My name is Alex Nelson. I'm the National Digital Inclusion Project Coordinator at, as I mentioned, Kansas City Public Library. And a fun fact about me is that I have a very large collection of Star Wars books. I'm very nerdy in that respect. And being in Portland for PLA, I've actually been able to go to the world's largest bookstore, if you've ever heard of that. It's called Powell's Books, and it's like 4 stories. It's incredible. I did not know it was that big, but I am proud to say that my collection of books rivaled what they had. So, slightly different context, but there you go. And I'll hand it over to my co-presenter now, Kate.
My name is Kate Rivera. I'm here today to talk about the Technology Learning Collaborative, which is based in Philadelphia. And so, yeah, my fun fact is that I just put a dartboard up in my house. I hadn't really played darts much since college, but had the idea recently and thought it would be a fun way to have a little distraction, a quick distraction when needed. So we'll see how good I get. And all right, my slides seem to be moving forward a little bit slowly here. So here we go. So what is digital inclusion? And we're just going to talk a little bit, just to level set for folks not knowing what your knowledge base is. So Alex and I will mostly be talking about the communities of practice that we're involved in our respective locations. But first, we wanted to just make sure everyone had a good understanding of the the digital inclusion topics that we'll be covering. Also wanted to just mention that we definitely would like this to be interactive. So if you have questions, thoughts, comments, please do drop them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that and responding as we can, and there will be some time near the end we'll be asking for your thoughts as well. So digital inclusion is basically, it's a set of activities that are working towards the goal of digital equity, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so those of you who may have been doing this work for a while may recall we used to always talk about digital inclusion being a 3-legged stool, right? And the first leg is having access to the internet, having a broadband connection, and having that be affordable and high quality that meets your needs. So not just having that connection, but having one that works well. The second one being a device. And again, the device should fit the needs of the person. So for some folks that may be a laptop or desktop computer. For other folks that might be a tablet or even a smartphone, really depending on what they need the device for and what their comfort level is with different types of devices. And the third is access to digital literacy or digital skills training. So, if you have these devices, you have a device, you have an internet connection, but you need to know how to use those things and how to use them effectively to accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, or just to connect with family and friends. And then there's a couple additional elements that folks have been including in the definition more recently. One is quality tech support. So that's really important, quality and also affordable, again, because you can get all set up with a device and internet, and then if something breaks or stops working, you need to be able to go somewhere to get help with that. And the last piece is really just having content online and applications that are user friendly and that allow people to accomplish their goals once they get online.
And then we have some more definitions here that are pretty key to digital inclusion and pretty key to community to practice regarding digital inclusion as well. Digital equity is a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And it's necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So kind of building on of what Kate just talked about on the last slide here, when we think about digital inclusion as a three-legged stool, digital equity can oftentimes be thought of as what the stool is supporting or what the stool is aiming to hold up, because digital equity means that we have to empower everyone to be able to participate fully in society as a whole, like the facets listed in that definition of democracy, economy, employment, things like that. In the world today, as I'm sure we all know, having lived through the pandemic the past 2 years and still living through it, you cannot participate in society without some form of digital access and digital equity. And then the last one on the slide, digital literacy, the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, requiring both cognitive and technical skills. It's basically like literacy for books, but for computers, tablets, anything digital, anything technological related. And so that can range from how do I turn on a computer and click around on the screen to navigate to my email, to how do I use my smartphone, to a variety of different things like that. And so both of those definitions are really key for the understanding of digital inclusion as a whole. And whenever we talk about digital inclusion, and specifically for this presentation, coalition work relating to digital inclusion.
And then just a little bit about, why would you form a coalition? Why are coalitions important in order to advance digital inclusion or digital equity efforts? And this information is sort of summarized from a guidebook. For those who may not be familiar, there's a National Digital Inclusion Alliance that if you're interested in this topic, you may want to consider joining. We have a link to their website near the end of this presentation. They put together a ton of really good information on digital inclusion efforts. And so this is kind of summarized from a guidebook that they put together specifically on forming coalitions for digital inclusion work. So the first point here is on advocacy. And so, the idea here is that rather than each individual organization who may be working on digital inclusion issues having to advocate for digital inclusion as an issue and do that outreach individually to elected officials and the media and other leaders, having a coalition really helps to pull those efforts together and make them more effective, as well as reducing the work that any one organization needs to do to advance the issue.
And then the next bullet point here is alignment. And whenever I think about alignment, I always think about, my grandma, and I'm sure many other people have said this too, but many hands make light work. A little bit like what Kate was talking about in advocacy, coalitions create a framework to align the perspectives and efforts of the varied community players, which is more effective than disjointed and potentially duplicative efforts. So essentially what you can think about that is coalitions help make sure everyone is on the same track. And if they are doing the same things, they're doing it together in a way that makes it easier or alleviates the work for other organizations. And you don't have 10 people doing the same exact thing or different thing. So it really helps everyone build upon each other and make sure everyone's focusing on the same goal. And that way we can be the most productive as possible.
And lastly is networking. And, this is really great. Every organization has their own unique perspective and, areas that they're really an expert in. And when you form a coalition and work with a lot of other organizations, you get to understand and learn about those other perspectives and those other subject matters that you may not have the expertise in. And then, work together to potentially form new partnerships and enhance your programming and, really just become more knowledgeable. And also for, so there may be coalition members who have more experience or less experience in the digital inclusion field, and being able to share for folks who have more experience, being able to share with them with the newer organizations, so that new organizations don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you come up with all of their own curriculum and ideas. They can learn from others. So now for our the next portion of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Technology Learning Collaborative in Philadelphia, and then Alex will talk a little bit about the coalition that he's involved in, and then we'll kind of bring it all together at the end. I do see one comment in the chat before I get started talking about the Technology Learning Collaborative. Coalition work is near and dear to my heart. Curious if folks joining here already have coalition partners or other kinds of community collaborations in place or looking to get started. That's a great question. Thank you, Amy, for posting that. Folks, please do jump in with your thoughts there, and we'll be talking about that topic as well a little bit more later in the presentation. So the Technology Learning Collaborative is Philadelphia-based. So this is, you'll see some differences between the coalition, my coalition that I'll be talking about, and the group that Alex will be talking about, which Alex's is not based just in one city or region. Mine is entirely just in Philadelphia. And we are a professional development organization, essentially, for digital inclusion practitioners and advocates. Again, based entirely in Philadelphia. And then we have over 400 members now that represent either themselves or an organization. And our members really run the gamut from kind of social service organizations that really focus on computer refurbishing and distribution, workforce development, media literacy, and a whole range of different issues. So Technology Learning Collaborative, or TLC Philly, the way that we started is that we grew out of a partnership, a large collaborative that was in response to a large funding opportunity about 10 years ago, when the federal government had stimulus funding specifically for broadband programs. And so over 50 different organizations in Philadelphia came together under that funding opportunity, established a network of over 77 free computer labs, provided a ton of digital literacy training, and helped folks get connected. And, as the federal funding for that effort was winding down, a number of the community-based organizations who were involved in that effort kind of got together and said, we want to see this collaboration continue. We've learned so much from each other, and working together has been so effective that even after this funding is gone, we want to find a way to still network and be able to stay connected and continue to learn. And so that's kind of how we were formed about 8 years ago. And then we actually operated as entirely volunteer-led, unincorporated organization for about 7 or 8 years. And then just recently, we've actually begun the process of really formalizing this work. And so we've now incorporated, I guess I need to update my slide because we just 2 days ago received our IRS approval as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We applied almost 9 months ago. It took them 9 months to review our application, but we are officially a nonprofit now. And so, with that, we have been able to really launch a growth phase, applying for funding. So we've always had sort of monthly workshops and an annual conference as a way of sharing information and bringing folks together. But now with some grant funding, we've been expanding that out to do trainings for social service organizations and community groups who may not see themselves as digital inclusion practitioners, but do connect with people who need access to the internet and devices and all of those things. And so getting them up to speed and involving them in this work. And we launched a community on Slack in addition to an email listserv that we have to try to get folks to connect and talk more with each other. And we've also begun some regional discussions with groups in other parts of Pennsylvania and in New Jersey as well. And so, as part of our kind of planning process, we put together kind of 3 pillars that guide our work. And so the first is really focused on information and resource sharing. So that's, having the listserv and having ways to connect members to each other so that, again, as folks have questions or see resources that they're able to share and everyone stays up to date on the latest resources and that people are able to communicate with each other to get questions answered or to get advice. Secondly is professional development and capacity building. And for that, I was just talking about this a little bit, having webinars, conferences, we're offering free training to basically any organization that wants to learn about digital inclusion issues. And we're also working to launch more customized training and capacity building, again, so that, organizations who may be looking to start offering digital inclusion programming or improve their existing programming can speak with someone else who's sort of an expert in that topic and get assistance with that instead of trying to start from scratch or reinvent the wheel. And lastly, really is focusing on that community of practice idea, really bringing folks together, making those connections, making sure that we're not, working in our individual silos, but really fostering that culture or spirit of collaboration, and thinking about how organizations within the network can partner more closely. I just wanted to touch very briefly on our coalition structure. So every coalition, there's no one size fits all solution for how to structure a coalition. Every coalition structure is going to look different. A lot of times coalitions come together with a backbone organization where there's one organization that's really providing a lot of the capacity and leadership for the coalition. In our case, it really has been a collaborative effort amongst a number of organizations to kind of stand up this coalition. And so our current structure is that we have a board of directors and a planning committee that's made up of different folks from different organizations who really are guiding our efforts and planning our workshops and conferences. We do currently have a fiscal sponsor since we were waiting for our 501c3, but now that we have that, we'll be able to eliminate that piece. We only just recently, as I mentioned, got funding to actually have paid staff, and we're looking to expand that. So we do right now have me, who is serving as the lead for the organization, right now just part-time as a consultant, again, really kind of guiding the efforts. And then we have members. It's free to be a member of the organization. As I said, we have about 500 members who are involved in the coalition, and then other key partners that we work with as well, who may not formally be members, but are an important part of digital inclusion in Philadelphia. And then I'll turn things over to Alex to talk a little bit about his collaborative.
Great. Thank you, Kate. And before I start talking about the coalition that I'm involved with, I wanted to thank Junix, I think. I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong. In the chat, they said that we have partnerships at my work, but we aren't necessarily a part of a larger collaborative. We have more partnerships based on specific programs we run. And I wanted to echo what Amy said in response to that too. That's a really great foundation, especially at my team too. We do have a lot of small partnerships that are basically based on just, one or two things that we're doing. But I really think there's a lot of opportunity to expand individual partnerships with organizations that maybe aren't directly related to the work you're doing too into a larger foundation. Oh, I did say it right. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, good. Sometimes with the J's, I don't know if it's the H sound or the J sound. But anyway, thanks for the feedback. It's always good to know that I did it correctly, or if I didn't, so I can fix it for the future. But with that being said, I think we'll get into a little bit more of the meat and potatoes here, or the Beyond Burger and potatoes, if you like, because if you're a vegetarian or whatnot, of my coalition and how we can hopefully help you all understand a little bit more about the exciting opportunities that coalition work offers. So I am part of the Kansas City Public Library, specifically the Tech Access team. And my coalition came around as a response to the Accelerating Promising Practices grant, which we'll get into in just a second. I just wanted to also put up the KCPL logo on the slide back there. In case you're wondering what that building was, on the right-hand side, that was the logo. And on the left-hand side, that was actually the library that I work at. It used to be a bank, and it's not a bank anymore, but that's why our logo looks like that. But anyways, enough about the logo. Now talking about Kansas City Public Library, Tech Access, and the APP grant. So Kansas City Public Library is a public library. So this is where I get a little bit of the distinction between Kate here, who really comes from the, congratulations, by the way, the nonprofit now officially side of things. I'm coming at it from the library side of things. So it's a slightly different kind of role, still a nonprofit area, but a different aspect. And specifically the Tech Access team. So I've got the mission statement for the Tech Access team down here. We're a division in the Kansas City Public Library. And our mission is to connect Kansas City Public Library and communities to promote digital inclusion, technology proficiency, and lifelong learning among adults. And funny enough, we just only about a month ago, we spent like 3 hours debating about what our mission statement should be. And that's what we came up with. So I hope you all like it, because it took us a while to get there. But the mission statement really does encapsulate what we are all about at Tech Access. We really want to promote digital inclusion and connect adults to and all kinds of people, really, but we focus among adults mostly, to technology and make sure they have the ability to use that. So what culminated in this coalition, or what this coalition culminated from, was the Accelerating Promising Practices grant. So that's a grant from IMLS, or the Institute of Museum and Library Services, or if you haven't heard of them. And Junix says that we spent months debating and revising our mission statement. Ha ha ha. Yes, I know it's very nitpicky. I never thought we could get into the meaning of wraparound services and spend 20 minutes discussing if we should put that in or not. So we've all had a good laugh. So I'm glad to know that other people are having that experience too. But so back on track to the grant. The grant is called Accelerating Promising Practices, and the aim of the grant is to accelerate, obviously, as the name implies, practices that are being engaged in a variety of different categories, from things like community memory, K-12 libraries, and digital inclusion. So the Kansas City Public Library applied to be a part of this grant, and we got it, which was great. And so we got part of the digital inclusion wing. So what that means is we work with 13 other small and rural libraries in what's called a cohort to try and help make sure that everyone's digital inclusion project is successful, because all of these libraries have their own digital inclusion project that they're doing. And we, as the Kansas City Public Library, our job is to help make sure that that project is successful. And these libraries come from all across the U.S. We have some in small rural Texas, some in Colorado, one in Puerto Rico, one in the Finger Lakes region of New York. So we really run the gambit with all of the libraries that we work with. And all of us are working on digital inclusion projects. And then here's the structure a little bit. I actually didn't have this in here until I saw Kate's structure of her coalition structure. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's a great way to demonstrate it. So you might be familiar with this if you've ever worked with grant programs. And if you're not, this is a really interesting model. It's called the cohort model. We didn't invent it, but we've been using it a lot, and I think we've learned a lot from it. So it's called a cohort model because we have two groups or cohorts of libraries, a group of 10 and a group of 3. And so you have on the lower right left-hand corner the group of 10, and the lower right-hand corner the group of 3. Kansas City Public Library, and our position in this coalition, is what's called the mentor institution. What that means is the libraries we work with are smaller and rural, which means that they don't have access to the same resources that a larger urban organization has. I want to clarify, that doesn't mean we are better or know more than them. We just have more resources than they do. I've learned a lot, and Kansas City Public Library has learned a lot working with smaller and rural organizations. And that's a great thing about a coalition. I think Kate touched on that a little while ago, is that everyone can learn whether or not you are a big organization or a small organization. There's so much to learn from each other, regardless of your experience levels. But as the mentor institution, we are responsible for sort of synthesizing the resources that we have at our disposal to help make sure the digital inclusion projects of all the libraries in each of the cohorts succeed. So at the top, we've got IMLS, which is where the funding comes from. And then we have at the left and the right, local and national organizations that we as KCPL have connections to. And so we've used organizations like NTEN, for example. We've used NTEN to help with our cohorts. We've used local organizations like Nonprofit Connect, which is a local nonprofit organization in Kansas City. The Encore Institute for Social Impact is another one we're going to work with. That's another local one in Kansas City. We've also worked with the NDIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, so another national network. And then I also think it's important to note that we've got these two little circle or arrow cycles that I put down in the left and right-hand corners. And those demonstrate that, it's not just the libraries working with us in a one-on-one capacity, but the libraries actually work with each other. And that's a really, really cool thing about this grant and this structure and about coalitions in general, is that everyone can work together to help make sure their projects are successful. So it's not just collaborating with us, but it's collaborating with each other as well. And that's why those are there. And we'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide here when we talk about some of our initiatives that we've done. And there we go, project initiatives and highlights. So similar to Kate, we do monthly meetings, and this is one of the great things about coalitions. We'll get into this a little bit in the future too, but you can talk in your monthly meetings about things that are going wrong, things that are going right. Just come together and touch base on your projects. And the library's projects that we work with, they're all digital inclusion projects, but they're not all the same exact thing. It's not like they're all providing broadband access or hotspots. We have classes for senior citizens, to a digital inclusion program that helps try and break the cycle of recidivism for inmates in a local county jail. So they really run the gambit in terms of what their actual content is. And so that's really interesting for a coalition side of things, because it means and it shows that you don't have to be doing the same exact thing, that you don't all have to be working on the same exact project, but because you're all focused towards this goal of digital inclusion and closing the digital divide, it means that you can come together and have really rich, thought-provoking discussions every month, that you learn a lot from each other, and you hopefully can get to a different place that you weren't necessarily before you had a meeting or a discussion. We also, like Kate and TLC Philly, do monthly webinars, and we've had NTENs help with some of the webinars. We've also had webinars from local people in KCPL who work with digital inclusion programs as sort of case studies. This is what you can do. And the webinars are really, really helpful because they're educational. And that's another great thing about a coalition, is you can get someone who's an authority figure who knows what they're talking about, and then disseminate that information really quickly to people who want to learn about it. And that way, it's another way of improving your community of practice. That way, everyone's learning, everyone's gaining information. And then the thing I wanted to highlight too is adapting to COVID-19. Now, I'm sure every organization has had to adapt to COVID in some way. It has been ever present, and it is still a factor. I don't know if anyone's watching the numbers in Europe, but they're pretty frightening. So I think COVID is here to stay. Not to fearmonger. I'm getting sidetracked a little bit. We'll be fine no matter what, but we still need to know how to adapt. And for the adaption part of things, I wanted to highlight two libraries that have similar programs, but I think have adapted really, really well as a result of their work with our cohort, but also their own ingenuity and their own project expertise as well. So, and the libraries are pictured here. At the top, we've got El Paso Community College Library, specifically the Valle Verde campus, if you've ever been there or been around that area. And their project was to help senior citizens. It was called Seniors Going Digital, which is just such a great name. And they would work with seniors to do all sorts of things like use Facebook and Twitter and even online dating sites, because as they put it in their project proposal, even seniors deserve love, which is very sweet. And things as simple as, how do you turn on a computer? How do you use a mouse and a keyboard and all of that stuff? And then the Biblioteca de Centro para Puerto Rico is a small library for a private organization in Puerto Rico. And they were very similar to El Paso Community College, putting on workshops for digital literacy for members of their community. Things like, how do I use a computer, to how do I start a business or a small business, or how do I apply for a certain piece of paperwork that I need for whatever reason. So all of those were very contingent upon in-person meeting. And when COVID hit, it was kind of a disaster because you couldn't do it in person anymore. But thankfully, with the cohort's help, and like I said, their own initiative too, because they had to have a big part in this, they were able to come together and we discuss, okay, how do we adapt to this? What do we do? How do we overcome this? And what both libraries did was very similar, but also different in how they executed it. They both made their classes virtual. But what El Paso did is they put their classes on a local public access cable channel, specifically targeted towards senior citizens. And that's been a huge success. They've had more people than they would have ever expected, watching it, writing in or calling them and saying, hey, I love this program. Can we get this or can we do that? They've reached a lot more people. And the Centro para Puerto Rico has been able to record and put theirs online on Facebook, which means that, you sacrifice a little bit of the initial gateway into getting people who don't know how to use Facebook, but they've been able to reach a lot more people in their community all over the island, not just in San Juan where they're based. And also what's really exciting for me is that they've been able to reach the wider Antillean and Caribbean community as a whole too. They haven't only been affecting people on the island of Puerto Rico, but people from like the Dominican Republic or Haiti have been able to watch these and benefit from these videos too. So they've really strengthened their impact. And that's all through the work that they've done on their own and as a part of this cohort and this coalition.
Great. So we wanted to kind of bring together and talk a little bit about, although Alex and I, the coalitions that we're involved in are very different. In some ways, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of the kind of best practices, challenges, and lessons learned are pretty universal for coalitions. So we just wanted to talk through a few of those here. So first, being intentional and strategic about your collaborative's role. So really thinking about where are the gaps that you're looking to fill, and how can forming a collaborative fill those gaps and move the work forward, right? So, and that's both when you're forming the collaborative, but also over time, really adapting the collaborative's role and, really taking a good look at the digital equity landscape, either, depending on whether you're focusing geographically on a certain city or county, or if it's more of a regional or national collaboration, really getting a sense of what that landscape is, and being really thoughtful about how is the coalition, filling a need and moving that work forward.
Another best practice that both Kate and I have learned throughout our work with coalitions is being inclusive too. And equity, diversity, inclusion are obviously big parts of things, big parts of how you should go about things now. But I've learned a lot specifically with my work with libraries, small and rural libraries all across the country, is that demographic diversity is very important. And I want to stress that. You should obviously be looking to make sure you're including diverse perspectives, BIPOC, LGBTQ plus people. Obviously, those people should be represented in coalitions too. But diversity of experience is something that I feel like is overlooked is probably not the right word for it, because I think it's definitely included, but it's something people should consider, especially when we're talking about EDI, is, for example, the difference in experience between a small and rural library serving a town of 2,000 people with little to no internet connection is vastly different than an organization like the Kansas City Public Library that is serving hundreds of thousands of patrons, where internet connection it's still a problem in the city, but it's a lot more available than in places like Pottsboro, Texas, which is where a library that we work with is. So diversity of experience is especially key when you're building a coalition or working with anyone. And I think that calls back to Junix, your partnerships too. Working with partners is really great because you get to engage in that demographic diversity. And one of the ways in which you can have that diversity of experience is sort of on a national level or a broader level in a coalition, bringing in people who you might not have worked with before and might not have been your partner just because your experiential fields are two totally different things. And Amy has something in the chat, and they said that in my experience, the coalition is a shared central focus, and coalition members have a diverse missions, a massive Venn diagram essentially. Would love to hear how you both approach that in your coalition. So there's a clear way to engage the coalition, but that does not everything the coalition needs to be a top priority for every member all the time. That is an excellent question, Amy. Thank you. And I think that actually, Kate, do you think you can address that in the next bullet point? Because I think we've talked a little bit about that as to what's coming up next too.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a great point, Amy, and it's definitely something that I know my coalition spent quite a bit of time working on. I think that I mean, one of the things that we did as a coalition, and this was really when we had some federal funding, so it was a little bit of a different approach. But one of the things that we really had a lot of conversations around was evaluating the effectiveness of the programs that the organizations were running and how we were going to do that. And as a part of that conversation, we really had to dive into the different missions and priorities that each of the organizations that were a part of the coalition had, and the different population groups that they worked with, right? So, and there was some very different perspectives. Like some of the folks in the coalition wanted to have everyone sort of universally gathering a lot of pretty specific information about the people who were participating in the program, so that we had, a robust set of data on our effectiveness, on who we were reaching, right? And then other organizations said, well, we were governed by HIPAA compliance, or we work with individuals experiencing homelessness or other challenges where, asking them to give a bunch of personal information when they're just trying to access a resource is just really against our mission. And so we had a lot of those types of conversations where that there is a point of alignment, right, which is like the digital inclusion work and wanting to move that forward. But each organization brings a very different perspective to that work. And so I think, part of that is really being able to talk through, to recenter folks and remind folks of where the commonalities are. And also being able to, acknowledge when different organizations may need to go in different directions. Not everyone needs to be moving in lockstep all the time. Not everyone needs to agree with every decision. It's great if you have unanimous agreement, but that's not always possible, right? So talking those things through, and really, I think we have this on one of the other bullet points here, but really focusing on relationships within coalitions, those one-on-one kind of relationships with the other people. So not just, organizational relationships, but really building trust and understanding and communicating between coalition members, so that when a conflict does come up, folks feel heard, they feel connected, and they're able to kind of work together to resolve that. I think that's a really important piece. And I guess just to wrap back around here with time commitments, which was my next bullet point. It can be really tough. Usually, oftentimes with a coalition, it's not someone's full-time job to run that coalition, though sometimes there is, and that's helpful. But oftentimes the folks who are contributing to the coalition and helping to lead efforts are juggling a lot of different roles. And, it's easy to get excited about your goals as a coalition and get really ambitious about what you want to accomplish. But you have to be really thoughtful, particularly when it's volunteer run or mostly volunteer run, to make sure that folks don't get burnt out or bite off more than they can chew.
Yeah, I think that the next bullet point also will answer Amy's question and go a little bit off what you said too, Kate, about burnout and things like that. Develop a clear structure that balances collaboration with efficient decision making, establishing clear roles. So, and another way to get that sort of massive Venn diagram that Amy mentioned, you mentioned in your question, is that the operative word here for coalition is community of practice, or operative words, I guess. Now, there is some scaling issues. Like, for example, we work with the Kansas City Coalition for Digital Inclusion, and that's a massive coalition that has 500 plus organizations in there, similar to TCL Philly, in that the size is big. And my coalition is not quite that large. But how I see it is, we are a community coming together to basically at the base level talk about what we're doing, what is our practice, what is going on, how are we engaging in our digital inclusion work, how can we do things better or worse. So part of that for the clear structure and roles means that we have someone who's leading the meeting, right? So we're not all just getting in there and it's turning into a book club where no one wants to talk about the book. It's structured where we say, okay, hi, I'm going to start the meeting now. Whoever's the facilitator for that, and a way to replicate that in your own coalition doesn't necessarily have to be one dedicated facilitator. Maybe the facilitator changes every week, but you have to have someone who is basically steering the ship, and then some other people who are there rowing, to use an extended metaphor. And that helps both make sure your decisions are efficient, so that as a coalition you can decide, okay, we want to start advocating for this on a municipal level or doing this kind of work, and just in your monthly meetings or whenever you have meetings to set an agenda or a structure. And in turn goes back to Amy's point about how you can make sure that people are doing their own thing, and that way you're not asking people, like Kate said, to basically volunteer their entire time to do this as if it were their full-time job, but at the same time you can have a direction and goal. So it's really, really key to keep in mind that we're a community, and a community to practice is really important. But at the same time, there's someone there who's got to give a little bit of structure and a little bit of direction to meetings, to organizational goals and things like that. Clear roles are really key for a coalition, because without that, it sort of just evolves down into, like I said, a book club where nobody wants to talk about the book. Everyone's there. There's supposed to be a topic binding everyone, but it just sort of snowballs like that. So clear roles are really key for all of those points.
And then coalition building is hard work. It's not always linear. So we were just talking about, there's a lot of relationship building, a lot of conversations, keeping those lines of communication open. Staff at organizations change, and organizations also change priorities. And so there may be, a longstanding coalition member who's done a lot of work, and then they leave the organization, and there's no clear kind of person to take their place, or no one left in the organization is really as passionate about the issue, or the organization may change priorities. So it's a kind of a constant process, and there may be new organizations starting that are not involved in the coalition, who should be or should be invited to the table as well. So sort of a constant process of always making sure that you have engagement, and working to rebuild engagement in some places, or form new connections as well.
And resources for coalition members and paid staff are also key to long-term success. This is especially close to home for me, because my position with this group and this coalition and this grant project was actually part-time until it was funded to be full-time, which has enabled me to do a lot of really cool things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So, that's a personal story for me, which is, yes, full-time employment, but sometimes that's not always an option. You do have to work with what you got, obviously. So if this coalition is going to be, I'm imagining it from the perspective of someone who's just going to start up and they don't really know what the future holds. They can't afford to go to their board of directors or their source of funding and say, we're going to start this and we need, $60,000 in benefits and all that for it. So you need to have some sort of funding, but in case you can't get a full paid staff to manage it in a certain capacity, because I understand, that's not possible or practical for every organization, right? But someone involved has to be paid, because, or at least has to have some sort of resource. And that's where I think it's it's good to focus on resources, because resources doesn't necessarily have to mean financial funding, although, that's really great. And we do want to have financial funding. And in a perfect world, all of our projects and coalitions could be funded. But resources can also refer to simple things from, gift baskets. That's what we've done. That's been pretty successful. We've given gift baskets to our cohort members. When we all gather and convene for in-person meetings, we can give them gifts. They all met in Kansas City, and so we gave them a bunch of local Kansas City gifts. And that was a big hit, which is a good thing to help prevent burnout, because people feel like they're validated and being heard. That is harder once you scale up. Like I said, scaling up and scaling down does change what you're able to do. But resources don't also have to be gift baskets. They can be things like, okay, here is a link to this resource that will help you in your project or something like that. So thinking about this as sort of two different parts, this point that I'm trying to make here is that resources are good. It could mean money, but it can also mean something that they're getting out of the coalition too. So you want people to feel like they're benefiting from the coalition in some way, because people are going to be hard pressed with their time already, especially in the nonprofit sector. I'm sure you all know that very, very well, that you're asked to do so much with often a lot less than the private sector. And you have to make it so that people are incentivized slightly, to be a part of your coalition, whether that's rewards like a gift basket or rewards like a resource they can use, something beneficial, quasi-tangible that they can get out of it. And then also the point about paid staff, longevity and sustainability in a coalition. It's really important to have long-term success with paid staff, people who can be paid to run your coalition and put their full effort into it. And if that's not an option right now, that's okay, but it's good to keep that in mind for the future too, that a paid staff is key, as it says, to long-term longevity.
Have a few takeaways for you summarized here, but we really like to hear from you in the chat about some of your experiences with partnerships and building coalitions. So our first takeaway here is looking for partnership opportunities, whether it's networking with other digital inclusion practitioners, forming working groups or coalitions. So as we were talking about a little bit earlier, in response to the comment in the chat, the start of a coalition doesn't have to be a huge group of people coming together and really formally putting together, this is our coalition, right? It can start with two organizations having a conversation. And really build from there. And then maybe a few other organizations get involved in the conversation. And, so the question that we'd love to hear your thoughts on in the chat here is successes and challenges you've encountered, or maybe that you anticipate encountering when you partner with other organizations or start building a coalition. And I was going to say, what was I just going to say? For TLC Philly, as I said earlier, we operated as an entirely volunteer-led, unincorporated organization for about 7 or 8 years. And so that's, and just now we've really formalized that and started to develop a lot more resources and expand our work. So that's an example, I think, of a successful partnership and coalition building that was very kind of grassroots. Didn't have one big organization pushing it or a bunch of funding or anything like that. It really did start with a few organizations getting together and saying, we really want to collaborate. We're going to continue collaborating. And let's create some pathways for doing that and really building off of that. Alex, any thoughts that you have on this question?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I'd like to also remind everyone in the chat who's watching too, please feel free to put your bullet points down in the chat to answer this question. We'll see it even if we're in the middle of a sentence or talking about another question. We really want to engage with everyone who's watching too, to help make sure that everyone can take away something really valuable from this presentation. Amy says, a lot to unpack about coalitions and organizational privilege. Orgs that are already more resourced often have the staff time and energy to lead coalitions and reinforce many of the challenges already rampant in the sector. Yes, that is very true. A great point, Amy. Thank you for that. And I think that's a challenge that I can talk about. Kate just talked about the success with TLC Philly. That is a challenge with the kind of coalition that I work with. And the cohort model is that when you work with, as a larger institution, the mentor institution is what it's called here, you can sometimes start reinforcing, as Amy said, as they said, the challenge is rampant in the sector already. So part of the challenges for digital inclusion work with small and rural libraries is just the lack of resources available to small and rural libraries. IMLS is doing a fantastic job of funding small and rural libraries and their projects, but IMLS isn't the sole funder. There's the state organizations and the national organizations that also fund libraries, and that's just in the library field. I know there are other issues with smaller and more rural-based nonprofits too, not receiving the funding that they should. That's always a challenge. So whenever you're working with a coalition or going to form a coalition or just a partnership in general, it's always a good idea to take heed of Amy's reminder too, that you don't want to make sure you're reinforcing a negative structure in a coalition, and work as much as you can to avoid that sort of negative reinforcement, to avoid the dynamic of, okay, this is the larger organization, this is what we have to do to appease them, basically, or they know all. That's one thing that I've learned as a larger organization where your goal is to mentor the smaller organizations, is that you can learn a lot from the smaller organizations too. There have been, I think, 3 or 4 project initiatives that I've heard about from them that I've thought, that's really cool. We don't have that at my library. I'm going to try and take their idea and apply it here, even though they're doing it on a much smaller scale with much fewer resources, but they're the ones that came up with it. So that's a possible challenge as well, that, whenever you're building a group, you have to be mindful of who's in the group and make sure you're not reinforcing any negative dynamics as well. And this also kind of goes without saying, it should go without saying, but this morning I saw one of the cartoons from the New Yorker, and it was about the hearings for the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson. And it was a bunch of old white guys sitting up here going, all right, now what would you bring to our organization? And there she is, the woman of color, sitting in the chair being asked all these questions by all these people. Obviously that's a hyperbole, but I also think it refers to the point of, you want to make sure you're not having a coalition that's led by not only size or other demographics, but also other equity, diversity, inclusion markers as well, that aren't creating a hegemonic relationship in your coalition. So that's another key thing to keep in mind too. And then the next bullet point, connect with your local community beyond digital inclusion organizations. This one is a pet peeve or a pet project of mine, because a lot of the connections that we have are to organizations that necessarily aren't directly related to digital inclusion in some capacity, but they can do wonders with the coalition and being involved in it. So for anyone in the chat who wants to say something, are there any local resources in your community that might be able to help or be involved with your coalition, or a coalition that you're thinking about? And how can you reach out to those organizations? And if not, how can you explore your wider community to find others? Because I guarantee you, there are organizations out there that are doing something that is relevant to your work. It doesn't matter if it's digital inclusion or, I don't know, trying to figure out how to teach children to roast the best marshmallows. There's always something or some organization that can be helpful to you in some way, even if it's just like a generic, long-term organization that helps nonprofits plan out the future. There's always some organization like that. So anyone in the chat has anything to say, please shout it out. Otherwise, Kate, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually thinking again, kind of connecting back to Amy's question, and also I think our next bullet point too is, as you're thinking about the connecting with your local community and what organizations are involved, with your coalition or partnering with your coalition, really being intentional about, one, I think, as you were saying, Alex, like making sure that you're reaching different communities, and particularly the folks who are kind of most in need, but also really being intentional about who you're involving in terms of organization size and capacity. So, one thing to think about with digital inclusion coalitions is the extent to which you might involve internet service providers, which are often have large corporations, as well as like city government or local government or larger organizations. Again, that may be that may have a lot of resources, may have more capacity than a smaller grassroots organization, but also can kind of create a hierarchy within the coalition. And being really thoughtful about you don't want to exclude those organizations most likely because they are really an important piece of the puzzle, but being intentional about what their role is and making sure that you're making space to hear from that you're making space that that the voices are heard beyond just the major players. And so, having regular meetings to keep folks engaged, keeping those lines of communication open, like we were talking about, really building those personal relationships and having those conversations to make sure that things are on track and stay on track, and really frequently having different ways of getting feedback to make sure that you are shaping your future direction and moving forward in a way that really does take all these different viewpoints into account and is able to really make sure that you're meeting the moment as the coalition and as the environment evolves as well.
And we've got another question from Amy too in the chat. Thank you, Kate, for that. By the way, I didn't mean to jump in front of you there. I just wanted to get to Amy's question because I think it's a really good one. We've got about 4 minutes left here, so I think we'll both give our thoughts on that, and then if anyone else has any last minute questions, we can answer those too. But Amy wants to know about our experience with the tech stack for coalitions, meaning how do we choose tools and software and digital spaces for communications and sharing content resources, when it may mean that one organization owns the tech and the other doesn't, and then all the preferences and access challenges between orgs and different systems. One uses Google and one uses Microsoft. I think that's a really good question. And as I saw it, I was thinking a lot about it because that's something that we have to work with, especially as libraries, because oftentimes, in my experience, libraries have to choose either their organization has chosen for them already what technology system they're going to be using, or they have to go with whatever is the most easily funded. And so one thing that I've really been able to learn about working with organizations and having the tech stack interaction is that you need to make sure that people are at the very base level engaging on a platform that everyone can engage on, right? So if that's talking on Zoom or talking on Google Hangouts or whatever, but just make sure that everyone can talk and everyone can engage, and that you're not using a system like Teams if some people can't use Microsoft, for example. So at the very base level, people need to be able to speak to each other, and it could be at the very least just emailing and meeting on Zoom, and you don't have to use necessarily anything that's super specific or niche to one area. And Kate, I want to give you a chance to answer this too, so I'm going to cut my answer a little bit short here. Oops, and I just pulled up the settings on my presentation thing. All right. Sorry about that. But what I wanted to say very briefly was that also, if the question of ownership too, this is where clear roles and decisions as to who's in charge helps a lot too. That way you can say, okay, this person facilitated, now they own this technology, or this is their responsibility. But I'll turn it over to you, Kate, too.
Yeah, and while I'm answering that, I'll also just pull up our last slide, which is just some resources that you can pull up the presentation and link to some additional resources for you. But yeah, I think for us, part of making sure that the tech and communication tools are accessible to different groups is having multiple ways to engage with the coalition. So we have an email listserv. It's a Google group that folks use to share information and ask questions. We also launched a Slack community, which our thinking is that that's an opportunity for folks to chat a little bit more informally and connect a little bit differently than they would on a listserv. But we make sure to share information in both places, and we tell people, engage in the way that you see fit, whatever makes sense to you. We also try to make sure that we put together, so for the Slack community that we launched, we're putting together documentation about how to join Slack, what is Slack, how do you check your settings and things like that, because we also have to be mindful that even the folks who are working on digital inclusion issues may themselves need support in the digital space, may need training and awareness building about how to use those tools.
Yeah, we have a joke on the as the tech access team that some technology thing always has to go wrong whenever we're doing a tech access meeting.
Always, yes.
So that's an excellent point too, Kate.
And then, yeah, just this is our last slide. We just, included links. You can pull up the presentation in the shared notes document and click on these links if you want some more information. There's just a link to the Technology Learning Collaborative in Philly. I also mentioned the National Digital Inclusion Alliance has a digital inclusion coalition guidebook that they just updated, as a ton of great information about how to form and adapt your coalition. And then a few other resources there. Alex, I don't know if you wanted to mention any of the other links there.
Yeah, the Kansas City Coalition for Digital Inclusion is an example of a coalition you can follow. I mentioned that. Peer-to-peer University is a great resource for networking and creating learning circles. Tech Access, that's the website, my team's website. So if you want an example for that, North Star Digital Literacy is just another great digital inclusion resource. But those are all available, like Kate said, on the shared notes slide. And with that, I think that's everything we have. So thank you all so much for attending and for being a part of this great conference. I know it's been a long couple of days, so thank you all for showing up. We really appreciate that. And if you have any questions, of course, you are more than welcome to contact me or Kate, and we will get back to you. We'd love to talk more about this stuff. So thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.